Hi, everyone. I'm Councillor Glen Gower, and this is another edition of Developing Story, our video series that takes a look at planning and decision-making in Stittsville. I'm joined today by Jordan Moffatt. Hi, Jordan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glen, how are you?
Good. So today's topic is about roads and transportation. Something you and I hear about all the time. So Jordan works with me in my office on all of our local planning files, as well as the citywide files that go through planning committee. And today I wanted to touch on when we're going to be building roads in Stittsville and where and what exactly we mean. We're talking about roads, how we pay for them, and how we might be able to get them built faster. Jordan, I know you see and hear a lot of the feedback from residents around transportation. What are the kinds of things we're hearing a lot of these days from residents in terms of priorities?
Well, basically, whenever we get a new development application in Stittsville, we get emails or calls from residents who are asking about how the transportation system that we have in Stittsville now is going to be impacted by an influx of new residents. How are they going to be able to move around Stittsville and in and out of Stittsville with the roads that we currently have that aren't really designed for this amount of residents? And the specific stuff is Stittsville, Maine has traffic issues. Fernbank is still a rural road. Huntmar to get to the highway, there's traffic there. And Robert Grant, the promised north-south arterial from Fernbank to the Queensway. It's right now only goes to Abbott. You'll want to know when it's going to be built and why it's not built yet. That's kind of the main themes.
Yeah, all good questions. I should say we're talking about roads. In fact, all of them that you've mentioned, we're talking about, yes, the lanes of pavement for vehicle traffic, for residents and businesses, accessing homes, accessing businesses. But for all of these projects too, it's not just about vehicles and drivers, it's also about pedestrians, and it's also about cyclists. And we're going to talk today also a little bit about transit, because most of the major roads have all of those components tied to them. I thought that the first place we could start, you mentioned Robert Grant Avenue, which is, I think, the most important transportation project for our community. So I'm going to bring up the map here. So let me share my screen. Share screen. I've got these in Photoshop, so I can actually draw on the map and notate them. Can you see that, Jordan?
I can, yes.
Okay, so I'll try to walk viewers through this map. So this is Robert Grant, the future alignment or corridor for Robert Grant Avenue. And down here on the bottom, this is Fernbank Road down here. Whoops, I'm not even drawing yet. There we go. Fernbank Road down here along the bottom. And then way up on the top is Highway 417. This is Canadian Tire Center. So hopefully that lets you orient yourself. Right now, Robert Grant Phase 1 has been built. So only a small portion of Phase 1 has been built. Right down at the bottom here. I'm just having trouble finding my cursor. Phase 1 of Robert Grant Avenue from Fernbank Road to Abbott Street. That's been built. It's been there for a number of years, serving the Fernbank community. But that's it so far. Actually, there's another part built. It's up at the top, right around the roundabout here at the top. Whoops. Roundabout right here at the top. This was just recently completed. I actually have a photo of it here. Let's have a look. This is the roundabout. It was a roundabout and an interchange built towards the Queensway, an upgrade towards the Queensway. This is the northernmost connection point for Robert Grant Avenue. But of course, we've got a big gap in between the roundabout and where the road is currently built. So there's a plan to continue building each of those missing parts of the road from here on out. And the next phase that's going to be built is to continue north from Abbott Street all the way up to, all the way up here to Hazeldean Road. So that's Phase 2. Now, we don't have a definitive timeline, but we are hopeful and things are looking good that construction would start on that by this time next fall, which is really good. Robert Grant Avenue would include the design of this segment would be very similar to what's there now. So 2 lanes of traffic, and on either side of it, there's sidewalks and a pedestrian pathway. And there'd be probably a roundabout, I think this is Cranesville Road. That's kind of the cross street that's shown in a dashed line right here. Whoops, right around there. That's the intersection with Cranesville. I think there'd be a roundabout there. And then you can also see on this map, I'll just hide it again. No, it's probably not what I wanted to do. I thought I could get rid of all the pink lines. Anyways, there are a number of transit stations. There's a P right here on the map, indicating a park and ride, and same down here, 2 parks and ride. So Robert Grant Avenue becomes a really important bus rapid transit corridor. And right at Hazeldean Road where it crosses is going to be a future light rail station. So this would be a phase 3 light rail to Canada and Stittsville. It would end at Hazeldean Road. So this Robert Grant corridor is super important towards future transportation in the neighborhood.
Robert Grant, it's not going to be a BRT from day one. It's going to look like the current section is now, and then in a few years, the whole thing will be doubled, and the center lanes, or maybe the curb lanes, but I think the plans are the center lanes is going to be dedicated to buses only.
Yeah, so between Hazeldean and Fernbank, it is BRT, bus rapid transit. And right now, Robert Grant has 2 lanes. In the future, it'd be expanded to 4 lanes, and 2 of those 4 would be dedicated to transit. So there'd be transit priority lanes down the road. So that would make a huge difference in terms of the future transit in the community.
Now, if I'm looking at this map, I'm seeing this kind of dark tan blocks, and those are development parcels. And so this next section between Hazeldean and Abbott, the future Robert Grant alignment cuts right through a development parcel. That makes it kind of unique. What does that actually mean for the building of the road, the construction of the road, and the cost?
Yeah, so it's hard to see here, but that you'll see there it's indicated as Kazell and Flog. Flog is Fernbank Landowners Group. Kazell is the name of the landowning company. And so we're going to talk a little bit later about development charges, and we're going to talk about front-ending agreements. But for now, it would be the Fernbank Landowners Group, and specifically the owners of the Kazell land, who would be building that segment of Robert Grant Avenue in advance of when the city's budgeted for it. And then later on, the city would be paying them back for that section of roadway. And it's all funded through development charges. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. But basically, we're looking to the developer to build that road ahead of when it's scheduled for the city. And so when you see shovels in the ground, hopefully in about a year from now or sooner, it'll be that builder who's responsible for constructing it.
So just in terms of timeline, you said shovels in the ground, hopefully about a year between Abbott and Hazeldean, and then the section further north from that, we still don't have a clear timeline on it, but the city has some sort of schedule for when it's going to be built, right?
Yeah, each phase has a schedule attached to it for budgeting purposes and planning purposes. The sections further north, they're going to depend a little bit on when development happens near them. Right now, it's looking like later in the decade. And of course, I'd like to move that up as soon as possible, because Robert Grant is the major transportation spine through the community that would take a lot of the pressure off of Terry Fox, for example, take a lot of the pressure off of Huntmar, and even take pressure off of Stittsville, Maine, and Carp Road, because we'd have another north-south arterial route through the community. So it's incredibly important to get this Robert Grant Avenue built as soon as possible. And you know, I have been able to, over the last years since I've been in office, it's been a priority for me, and we've been able to move a lot of that scheduling up sooner than it was originally anticipated.
So when you say that it's going to take pressure off Stittsville Main Street, I think let's steer here. So Stittsville Main Street operating right now is kind of a main north-south arterial. How do you envision Stittsville Main Street changing when there's more relief, because there's a dedicated transit and vehicle route north-south?
Well, maybe it's worth putting up another map here, just showing the ward all at once. So this is Stittsville, and we were just looking at the corridor for Robert Grant Avenue. So Robert Grant currently is built here, and as we saw in that plan, it'll continue up here across Maple Grove Road, take a little jog over here, and connect up to that roundabout. So that's our Robert Grant Avenue, and I'll just highlight Stittsville Main Street. Maybe I'll pick a different color here. Stittsville Main Street, obviously, the built-up part of Stittsville Main is kind of through the center here, and then there's one of two routes that you can take once you get to this point at Stittsville Main. You can head up Carp Road to get to the Queensway, and eventually, we'll talk about this soon too, Stittsville Main Street is going to connect up to the Queensway this way. But until Robert Grant is built, if you're living in this big area of new homes down here, really the most attractive route to get north-south is down Stittsville Main Street. Or maybe I think some people might head over to Terry Fox to get out of the community. But there's another road that's being built and constructed right now. They're actually building what's called a trunk sewer underneath it. And that's Cope Avenue. So most people know Cope Avenue. It actually starts over in Canada, but from Terry Fox Drive, it continues over to Fernbank. Actually, I'm in the right spot. At Cope Drive here, we've got the new LCBO on the corner here and the Walmart here. And then Cope Drive continues. You know what, Jordan, I've probably confused everyone here because I just located the LCBO and the Walmart in the wrong spot. The LCBO is in fact here, and the Walmart is over here. So Cope Drive continues across Robert Grant. It's built so far about to here. But in the future, Cope Drive is going to be built out across Shea Road, and it'll take a turn and come right down to Fernbank. So you can kind of see how a lot of these folks who are living here now in the south part of the community, once these roads are built out, they're going to have a really attractive route to take Cope Drive, and they can either go all the way over to Terry Fox, or they can use the roundabout here and get up on Robert Grant Avenue and head up to the Queensway. And Robert Grant is built in such a way that it's limiting the number of access points. So there's only a few intersections, and it's really designed as an arterial road to move traffic and bicycles and pedestrians and buses as quickly as possible. So between Robert Grant and Cope, this is really one of the solutions to reduce the traffic pressure on Stittsville Main Street.
And both Robert Grant and Cope will have dedicated cycling facilities as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's something that we've been looking really, really carefully at to make sure that this infrastructure is built correctly from the get-go, because when roads are constructed, that's really our chance to get these things right.
So how do you anticipate Stittsville Main Street evolving then as traffic is able to go in different patterns to the highway?
Well, right now, Stittsville Main Street, it very much is, it's a north-south route for cars to get from one end of the community to another. That's how it's functioning now. It's functioning as a roadway. We want to transform it into a street. So if you think about main streets in Manotick or in Carleton Place or in Almont or in Smith Falls even, these streets are functioning differently. It's not about moving vehicles as quickly north-south. It's about how do you properly serve the residents and the businesses who live on Stittsville Main Street and who live adjacent to Stittsville Main Street. And so that's kind of a shift that we're going to see over the next couple of decades. Once we can get some of that through traffic off of the street, we can start to slow down traffic, make it a more friendly pedestrian and cycling environment, which will be beneficial towards the businesses who are established there and make it easy for local residents, not just who live on Stittsville Main, but if you live on some of the side streets, like on Abbott Street or on Beverly Street or Holborn Street or Liard or Bray, it'll be a much easier and more pleasant and more safe environment to actually walk in and not have to always rely on your car. And to that end, we're actually in the middle of a process right now called the Public Realm Plan for Stittsville Main Street. And we're looking at how do we reconfigure that street, the lanes on the roadway, the sidewalks, can we add a bike path or protected infrastructure for cyclists so that it functions better as a local street and for safety, for flow. There's a lot of improvements that we can make on Stittsville Main to help as it evolves.
right, so that's Stittsville, Maine. Let's zoom out again. Let's go back to the question that started this out. We have residents who are concerned that the current streets in Stittsville aren't built to the standards that are required for the growth that's happening. One of the fastest growing communities in Ottawa, if not the fastest.
Yeah.
And these roads are Carp, Fernbank, Huntmar, Maple Grove. When are these going to get the modernization or the upgrades or the widenings that they need to have?
Well, maybe I could share another map with you, Jordan. I've got a transportation map. Let me just load it up here. So the sequence in which roads are built was all set out in 2013 in the city's transportation master plan. So 8 years ago that this was last passed by the city. And I know this map is a little hard to see, so I will definitely walk people through this one. So this is the future plan projects road and rapid transit for Ward 6. And some of the roads we've talked about and the ones that you've mentioned are indicated on this map, along with the timeline for when they're going to be built. So as it stands, let's go to Carp Road. That's one of the frequently asked questions. Carp Road widening from 417 to Hazeldean, it says 2020 to 2025 is scheduled to have that widened.
And we're in 2021 right now.
We're in 2021. So I'll talk about the schedule in a moment here. Maple Grove widening from Huntmar to Terry Fox, post 2031. If you come down here, Fernbank Road widening, Stittsville, Maine to Terry Fox, post 2031. Terry Fox Drive widening, post 2031. Robert Grant, Hazeldean to Abbott, 2020 to 2025. So some of these have happened on time. So the first phase of Robert Grant Avenue here, Abbott to Fernbank, 2014 to 2019, happened right on schedule. Stittsville Arterial, 2020 to 2025, that looks doable, but we've had to work to get the developer to build that ahead of the city's schedule. But other projects are certainly not on schedule. This Carp Road widening, I am pessimistic about that happening before 2025. If you look over here, actually, this was a project recently completed. Campo Drive, Didsbury to Huntmar was supposed to have been done in 2014, 2019. This is the connection from Huntmar Drive over to Terry Fox. It was just completed earlier this year in 2021. So that's a couple years behind. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later in this. Why are we falling behind? And how do we get back on track? So, and the other thing I'll mention here is for some of these projects like Maple Grove post 2031, or especially Fernbank Road 2031, this plan was established back in 2013. 8 years later, we've seen a lot of changes in how Stittsville has developed. And I don't think they're in the right sequence, and I don't think the timeline is correct. So the city is going to be redoing the transportation master plan over the next couple of years. And I'm really going to emphasize to Stittsville residents, there will be opportunities for Stittsville residents to provide feedback. And I want to really make sure that the city staff and other councillors hear loud and clear where the priorities are for Stittsville and why it's so important that we get projects like Fernbank moved up on the priority list. Because as it stands now, like if you can imagine another 10 years before there's any upgrades to Fernbank Road is pretty, it's pretty unbelievable that that's the time frame for such a busy route in an area that continues to expand.
And staying on the subject of the TMP, it is pretty unusual that the city would have going on 8 years between an update to the transportation master plan. That's usually something that happens every 5 years or so. And the reason it didn't happen this time around is because of COVID-19, the pandemic. It sort of changed transportation patterns in the city and made it harder for the city to predict future transportation patterns. So what has to happen next to get that TMP actually sorted out?
Well, they've already started on it, but one of the key pieces that drives transportation planning is what's called an origin destination study, where they study on any trip someone makes, whether it's a commute to work or a drive to school or a bike ride to the local shop or a bus ride to work, whatever it might be. They do a study to say, where are people starting and where are people ending up? And how are people commuting? Are they commuting by car, by bus, by bike, by scooter, by foot? And that's really what informs the transportation planning, alongside other factors like growth patterns and demographics. Because of COVID, with so many people working from home, they decided to delay that study until we're a little bit further out of the pandemic. So I believe it's scheduled to happen next year. And the pandemic will still have an effect, and we'll still have to make sure we're studying that against some of the trends we're seeing with work from home. But that's the first big piece that they need to solidify before they can come up with a reprioritization of the different road projects across Stittsville and other parts of Ottawa.
And if you go back to that map for a second, it's labeled as road widenings. So that's what the city calls these projects, road widenings. That it's more than just widening a road. What does that actually entail?
Yeah, I think a better word would be urbanization of the roads in our case, or construction of the roads. A lot of cases like Fernbank Road, it's an old rural road. So when they upgrade that road, they'd be replacing the ditches with storm sewers. And they'd be building sidewalks, and they'd be building bicycle paths. They might widen the road to 2 lanes in each direction, or we might say, okay, we actually only need to keep, say, 2 lanes on this road, but add turning lanes at certain intersections. So they'll look at different design elements. In fact, we're doing that right now for Huntmar and the future extension of Stittsville Main Street. So north of Maple Grove Road, we're looking at what's the right configuration of that street. How do the city reserves a certain number of meters of width of the roadway. What's the best way to fit everything within that width to make sure transit roads for drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, that all of those uses can be accommodated and move the most people the most efficiently.
We just posted that info on the website maybe a month ago or so, the environmental assessments, what they call it.
Yeah, exactly. And there'll be some opportunities for residents to provide feedback as well.
All right, so now the big question, we have these dates. Some of them are post 2031, some of them are 2020 to 2025, but you're skeptical that actually will make that timeline. So
no, hold on. Carp Road 2020 to 2025, based on where I'm seeing other projects, every other project in the city is a few years behind in terms of getting those roads built. I would like to see Carp Road built as soon as possible. And through that TMP process, again, could be an opportunity to move that up the priority list. I think on Carp Road, not only is a good argument to be made that we need that road upgraded to serve the growth in our neighborhood, but if we can add infrastructure like storm sewers and so on, it makes it more attractive as a business corridor as well, and could increase property values. It could lead to a healthier business district in that area as well, along that Carp Road corridor. So there's a lot of good arguments to be made to move Carp Road up that priority and scheduling list as well.
So how come then roads like this, they don't get widened or built or urbanized or modernized in anticipation of the growth? How come it always has to come after the growth?
Well, it's a problem that we have in Ontario and in Ottawa around the limitations that we have for building roads and financing the roads. So when this plan was set out in 2013 and they said, we're going to build this road by this year and this road by this year, it was based on the cost of roads back then. And what we've seen since then is really a ballooning in construction costs and inflation. So when we did that plan back in 2013, we also said we're going to pay for these new arterial roads through something called development charges, so that growth pays for growth, so that new arterials that have to be built or upgrades to roads, major roads that need to happen because of an increasing population, that we're going to pay for that through development charges on every new home. Every new home has an amount that goes into a bucket of money, a reserve account, in order to pay for future amenities. And the plan in 2013 and then the budgeting plan, unfortunately, the further away we get from 2013, the more out of sync the plan budget and the money we're collecting is in relation to the cost of the roads. And I'm really concerned that with rising construction costs and labor costs and construction materials, that we're only going to see that gap grow. So it's a real problem right now for financing. We don't build the roads essentially until there's enough money in that bucket of funding to build them. But obviously, as people see on roads like Robert Grant or Fernbank or Stittsville Main Street, you end up with a constant catch up, and it's a real problem.
I know you have the DC charges handy. So what are the actual charges that that goes into this pool that helps fund projects like transportation projects?
I did get that just to give people an idea. Let's share the screen. So this is a chart. I know it's a bit hard to see, a chart showing residential development charges. So any new development, residential, commercial, industrial, they have to pay development charges. A good example is outside of the Greenbelt, that's where we are. Every new single and semi-detached home, there's a development charge of $40,000. And for every new apartment, dwelling or back-to-back or stacked townhomes, there's a development charge of $21,747. So, in Stittsville, we collect tens of millions of dollars every year in development charges that goes towards new amenities, roads, yes, also transit, new libraries, recreation centers, police stations, fire stations, and that money is collected from new development all over the city, and then it goes towards new growth projects.
And the cost of these roads is still pretty high. So Stittsville's collecting tens of millions. I think the second or third most of all wards in the city. I don't have that. I think that's accurate, but I don't have the actual number.
Yeah.
But still, roads cost a lot. So that new roundabout or that new northern leg of Robert Grant at Palladium that will eventually connect to the Stittsville or the next part of Robert Grant and this new development at 195 Huntmar, that cost about $11 million. And that new section of Robert Grant, what's the anticipated construction cost of that?
Robert Grant, just from Abbott Street to Hazeldean Road, is $20 million. In today's money, it could be more. And so people said, well, why not just raise development charges? If it's $40,000 now and you're falling behind, why not just add $10,000 or $20,000 to it? And the problem is that affects affordability of homes, because that development charge is charged to the developer, and then they work that into the price of new homes. So there's pros and cons, but you could probably see if all of a sudden we're adding $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 to the price of a new home, that affects the affordability of new homes. So it's not as simple a solution as that. I think
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I think what we need to do, we need to really have a serious conversation about should we take the opportunity to be borrowing some money in order to catch up on these projects. Like if we could, with the interest rates being so low right now, and the advantages that cities have in establishing low interest rates and getting a low interest rate, and the fact that these are long-term capital assets. I mean, this is a roadway or a transit way, or even a police station that will serve us for decades. I think that could be a very appropriate reason to be borrowing money to let us catch up and get rid of this gap. There'd be an implication of that. We'd have to be carrying interest charges, which would be factored into our city budget, and we'd have to make sure that we're accounting for that properly. But I really think that is probably the nearest term solution to catching up on this gap. And it's a conversation that I'm already starting to have with councillors and city staff about how to really look at that as a real option for us.
But there are still things being built. We are seeing new projects. You just mentioned the Campo Drive extension just got completed. We just opened up that roundabout with the cycling and multi-use paths around it as well, and shovels in the ground hopefully for that next leg of Robert Grant. So what are some other projects in Stittsville, in and around Stittsville, that are upcoming or recently completed or about to start being built?
Let's share that map again. I made a list here. So first one that comes to mind, let's see, find my cursor, is on Huntmar and Maple Grove. So right here, if anyone's gone through that intersection during a peak hour, you'll know that it's a problem. Well, the Huntmar Maple Grove intersection is being upgraded with more turning lanes and new signalization. That's coming early in 2022. So that's good news. There's a new road being built by a builder called Roger Griffiths Avenue. It's being built by Richcraft, I believe. It goes from Maple Grove all the way to Hazeldean Road, kind of between the Lowe's and the Value Village, roughly. And that's right now basically a construction access road, but some of the new homes are going to be opening. So this will be a near-term road, residential road. It's built and paid for by the developers. And then we're just a little bit further east on Hazeldean, on the east side of the barn, there's a new street known as Mantra Street that's we're going to see some new traffic lights here and Mantra Street opening up, which will give an alternate entrance to the neighborhood here to Cranesville. So folks in the Abbotsville Crossing neighborhood will have another route out fairly soon to Hazeldean Road. So that's good. Over at Terry Fox and Cope, near the LCBO and the Walmart and the plaza over there. We're doing an upgrade to the traffic lights there because of the increased traffic, so that's good. Over on Abbott Street, between Iber Road and Stittsville Main Street, we're going to be doing a resurfacing of Abbott Street, and we should be doing some accessibility and some traffic safety improvements there as part of that. Jordan, you mentioned the Huntmar Drive and Stittsville Main Street environmental assessment. So that's the design planning to upgrade Huntmar from Maple Grove heading north, and then for the future connection of Stittsville Main up to essentially the Queensway. There's a development by Claridge on Maple Grove Road, and they've committed to building the intersection and connection from Stittsville Main to Maple Grove Road. So that's in the near-ish future. And then we have, of course, you mentioned the Stittsville Main Public Realm Plan, which is a pretty important plan to look at the design of that street. Once we have the design, then we can look at how we get the funding to improve cycling and pedestrian infrastructure and start to reconstruct that street. So there is quite a bit going on. And then, like I said, the Robert Grant Avenue, that second phase, Abbott to Hazeldean, I'm really hoping we'll get some news early in the new year about construction starting very soon on that one.
Now, we've talked a lot about adding capacity for Stittsville because right now it's underbuilt in terms of the traffic network for people driving their cars.
Yeah.
But long term, it's also not just about adding capacity forever. We can't assume that every new household in Stittsville is going to be a 2 or 3 car household, right? Which we need alternative methods of transportation to make it easier for people to get around their neighborhoods and to access downtown and other neighborhoods in the city. Mm-hmm. So that is transit. So what can people expect for transit as part of this transportation mix in the future, especially for newer neighborhoods that aren't currently really served by transit at all in Stittsville?
Well, that's just it. I mean, across all of Ottawa, we have 1 million people in Ottawa now, and the city's growing to 1.4 million in the next 20 years or so. And there's really no way that you can grow as a city like that and rely only on vehicles and roads to get people around. You really have to improve the transit and the cycling and the pedestrian infrastructure. So on transit, the plan is to bring the third stage of light rail through Canada and Stittsville, past the Canadian Tire Center, and bring it out to, well, maybe I should draw on my map here again. Transit stations at Canadian Tire Center, at Maple Grove Road, at Hazeldean Road, for LRT stations, and then that would convert to a bus rapid transit station as it continues down all the way to Fernbank, and there's some park and rides along there as well. Obviously, improving the bus services on spine routes like Hazeldean Road is really important, so that's coming too. But I wanted to tell you where we're going to see the most significant upgrades to transit, and it's in the Fernbank neighborhood, where right now I really think one of the most underserved neighborhoods when it comes to transit. And part of that is some of the constraints because the roads for the buses to go on simply haven't been built yet. So what you're seeing on this map is the planned rapid transit routes for the Fernbank area. So this red line down the middle is the future bus rapid transit route. So the buses would take Robert Grant Avenue, going from Hazeldean to Fernbank Road, and connecting to that T is the transit station and park and ride. So that's where you'd switch over to the train to head north or get on another bus to head eastward down Hazeldean Road. This yellow route would start at the park and ride at Fernbank and Robert Grant Avenue, and then would come along Rouncy Road and connect up over to here on Robert Grant Avenue, and probably continue up, follow the same route as the red line here. And then the blue line is just another rapid transit route starting at the Fernbank Park and Ride, heading over to Cope Drive. Remember we talked about Cope earlier, and then would follow Cope and head towards the Canada South area. So just some of the, I would say, medium-term improvements to transit that we're expecting to see in the Fernbank neighborhood.
We've covered a lot of ground, and I don't know how long this was. I'm assuming, I have no idea, around a half an hour maybe?
I think we went longer than we anticipated, but I think we covered everything. We talked about Robert Grant Avenue. We talked about some of the other major roads. We talked about the near-term improvements and OC Transpo. We talked about how we pay for roads and some of the problems with that and how we might close it off. And the last thing on my list here is just going forward. We need residents' help. So if you're a Stittsville resident watching this, what I want to ask you is watch my email newsletter, watch my website, watch my weekly videos and social media. There are going to be opportunities in the next year or two to provide feedback on this new transportation master plan. And it's really important that the city hears loud and clear from Stittsville residents about the priorities for our community. And whatever that is for you, maybe it's Carp Road, maybe it's Fernbank, maybe it's transit. I really need to see a strong representation by Stittsville. It helps me be a better advocate at the city for budget dollars and for prioritization for our road projects. We are one of the fastest growing areas of the city here in Canada and Stittsville, and we need to have stronger transportation so people can get around to work, to school, to activities, to businesses. So it's really important that you get involved in these consultation processes.
I think that's a good place to end it, Glenn.
I think it is. So let me bring up our title screen here and thank everybody for watching today's edition of Developing Story. Thanks, Jordan.